Before the silence. Prologue. The signal. The void of space was vast, silent, endless. It was the place where stars were born, where galaxies collided, where nothing ever truly ended. The emptiness was an undeniable part of the universe, a place that pulled at the minds of those who dared to venture too far into its depths. For the crew of the Nightingale, it was supposed to be just another mission, a journey through the cold, dark expanse, following a distress signal from an unknown source. But from the moment they received the transmission, everything had changed. At first, it was barely noticeable. Just a slight crackle on the communications array, a few blips that couldn't be explained. The Nightingale, a research vessel, had been on its deep space survey for months, and everyone on board had grown used to the isolation. Yet, something about this signal didn't sit right. The captain, Arden Rowe, was the first to notice. "Check the frequency," he ordered, his voice tight as if he already knew something was wrong. A technician named Miko Reyes worked quickly at his console, his fingers flying over the keys. It's not from any known source, Captain. The signal, it's not like anything we've ever picked up." "What do you mean?" Rowe asked, stepping closer, his gaze fixed on the screen. It's like it's been encoded, Captain. But not like a normal encryption. It's almost as if it's been designed to be decoded only by something that knows what to look for. A pattern." "A pattern?" Rowe repeated, staring at the screen, a knot tightening in his gut. "Yeah," Reyes muttered, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "It's almost alive." Rowe felt his heart skip a beat. He had heard the rumors, stories whispered among the stars about ancient forces, strange artifacts, and alien intelligence lurking in the dark corners of space. But this was real. "What's the source?" Rowe demanded, his voice hardening. Reyes hesitated, his hands stilling on the console. His gaze shifted from the screen to Rowe, his face pale. "It's coming from the edge of the galaxy, sir, beyond any mapped territory. There's nothing out there." Rowe's mind raced. He had heard of missions like this before, missions that ventured into uncharted space and never returned. But this was different. The signal beckoned them, almost as if it was calling them to a place they couldn't resist. "We're going," Rowe said, his voice firm despite the growing unease in his chest. "Set a course, full speed." The Nightingale drifted silently through the void, its engines a distant hum. The crew had long since grown accustomed to the isolation of deep space, but this was something else. The signal had not stopped, but it had changed. It had become more insistent, more urgent, like it was trying to reach them faster than they could travel. Elara Sorn stood on the observation deck, staring out into the vast emptiness. The stars were distant pinpricks of light, scattered like dust across an endless black canvas. She could feel the pull, the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. The ship's captain, Rowe, had warned them about the dangers of the mission, but no one truly believed anything would go wrong. It was just another assignment after all. But as Elara watched the stars slowly drift by, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Something wasn't right. The signal wasn't just a distress call. It was something more. Something alive. Behind her, the sound of footsteps echoed across the metal floor. She turned to see Sorn, the ship's engineer, approaching with a frown on his face. "Captain wants you in the control room," he said quietly, his voice tinged with something she couldn't place. Elara nodded, her hand brushing against the cold glass of the observation deck as she turned and followed him down the narrow hallway. The air was thick with tension. The crew was starting to feel it, an unease that none of them could shake. The signal had changed them, and none of them knew why. When they reached the control room, Rowe was already waiting for them, his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze was fixed on the large screen ahead, where the signal was still pulsing, steady and rhythmic. "It's almost as if it's alive," Reyes said, his voice barely audible. Rowe nodded. "It's not just a message," he said slowly. It's something else, something we don't understand. Elara stepped closer to the console, staring at the signal. It was more than just a pattern. It was a call, a summons. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as the ship's lights flickered. For a moment, the room was bathed in an eerie red glow, and the air grew heavier. Then, as suddenly as it had happened, the lights returned to normal. "Captain," Elara said quietly. "What happens if we follow this signal?" Ro turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing. "We'll find out soon enough." The Nightingale continued its journey through the deep, dark expanse of space, its destination drawing closer. With each passing hour, the signal grew stronger, its pull more undeniable. But the crew of the Nightingale was about to learn a terrible truth. There are things in the void that cannot be understood, and once you hear them, they never let you go. As the ship approached the edge of known space, the silence deepened, and the stars seemed to blink out one by one, as if hiding from the darkness that was coming. The Nightingale had reached its destination. But was it too late to turn back? Or had they already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Chapter 1. The First Contact. The hum of the Nightingale's engines was the only sound in the control room, steady and comforting. The stars outside the ship's windows were distant pinpricks of light, like the glitter of forgotten dreams scattered across an endless abyss. It was the silence of space, a silence so profound that it seemed to smother everything. But there was something wrong with the silence. Elara Sorn sat in her seat, watching the signal grow stronger on the main display. It had been 2 days since the Nightingale first picked up the transmission, and in that time, it had only grown more insistent, more demanding. The signal was no longer just a faint whisper. It was clear now. Too clear. At first, the crew had treated it as a routine anomaly, a signal from some forgotten outpost, perhaps a distress call or an automated beacon. But as they got closer, as the ship neared the source of the transmission, the unease began to settle in like a thick fog. Elara's eyes flickered to Captain Ro, who stood near the comm station, his brow furrowed. He hadn't said much since the signal had started acting up. He rarely spoke now, his attention consumed by the constant pulse on the screen. "Captain," she spoke quietly, her voice breaking the stillness. "We're almost there." Ro didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out, adjusting the controls, his hands moving with an unnatural precision. His face was unreadable, but Elara knew him well enough to see the lines of tension around his eyes. He was a man who had seen his share of unknowns. But this was different. "It's not just a distress signal," Ro said finally, his voice low and steady, though there was a hint of something darker in it. "It's deliberate. Someone or something wants us here." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. She turned back to the console where the signal was now flashing in irregular bursts. It was like a heartbeat, pulsing in the deep void, a rhythm that was both familiar and unnatural. A few months ago, she would have dismissed it as a malfunction. But after the strange things they had already experienced, that was no longer an option. The glitches in the ship's systems, the flickering lights, the voices in the corridors that couldn't be explained. She had learned to trust her instincts. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't an accident. "We need to prepare for landing," Rose said, his voice clipped. He didn't take his eyes off the signal. "Have the crew ready for whatever happens next." Elara nodded, standing from her seat. She could feel the weight of the captain's words pressing down on her, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. "Understood," she replied, though a part of her wondered if they were ready at all. The ship's hallways were quiet as Elara made her way to the crew quarters. She passed the engine room, where Sorn and Reyes were talking in low voices. The crew was on edge, but there was no real fear yet. They were still unsure of what was going on, unaware of just how far they had already crossed into the unknown. Elara arrived at the crew quarters and found Miko Reyes, the communications officer, staring at the display screen on his station. He looked up when she entered, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and anxiety. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. "I do," Elara replied, crossing the room to stand beside him. The signal was clearer now, its pulse almost overwhelming in its intensity. "Something's not right," Reyes nodded. "I've been going over the readings, trying to make sense of it, but there's nothing like it. This signal, it's unlike anything we've encountered before. It's like it's alive." Elara swallowed. The word hung in the air, a heavy presence in the room. "Alive. Is it possible?" she asked, her voice trembling, slightly despite her best efforts. "Could it be some kind of alien intelligence?" Reyes shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but if it is, we're not prepared for it." Elara stared at the signal, a sinking feeling growing in her gut. They had signed up for an exploration mission, a search for lost colonies, forgotten signals, abandoned outposts. They had prepared for everything, except this. A loud clang echoed through the hallway outside, breaking the silence of the room. Both Elara and Reyes looked up in surprise. A few seconds passed, then another clang, a sharp, metallic sound. "Did you hear that?" Reyes asked, his voice tight. Elara nodded, moving quickly to the door. "I'll check it out." The corridors of the Nightingale were dim, lit only by the intermittent flicker of the overhead lights. Elara moved cautiously, her footsteps quiet on the metal floor. The sound had come from the aft of the ship, near the engine room. Another. Drilling. Closer this time. Elara quickened her pace. There was something unsettling about the noises, the dissonance of metal on metal, like a deliberate attempt to get her attention. She rounded a corner and froze. At the far end of the corridor stood one of the crew members. Lieutenant Aldrin, his back to her, was facing a hatch that led to the lower levels. The hatch was open slightly, as though someone had pried it open. "Aldrin?" Elara called, her voice calm but commanding. The lieutenant didn't respond. His body was rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. "Aldrin," Elara repeated, taking a step forward. Suddenly, Aldrin's head jerked to the side, his eyes wide and wild, his pupils dilated. He looked at her, but it wasn't the Lieutenant Aldrin she knew. His gaze was distant, unseeing, like he was looking through her rather than at her. A low, guttural sound escaped from his throat. Not words, just noise. Elara's heart skipped. She reached out instinctively, grabbing his shoulder and turning him toward her. His skin was cold to the touch. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking now. But Aldrin didn't answer. Instead, he let out a ragged breath and began to move toward the hatch. Slowly, unnaturally. "No," Elara whispered, grabbing his arm, again pulling him back. But Aldrin's body stiffened, and with surprising strength, he wrenched free from her grip and moved toward the opening, his steps slow and deliberate. A sound like static crackled through the air, sharp, invasive, and then, all at once, the ship's lights flickered violently, plunging the hallway into darkness. The silence that followed was deafening, and then from the darkness, a voice echoed through the ship, low, almost a whisper, but the words were unmistakable. "Come closer." Elara's blood ran cold. Something was calling them, something was waiting, and she feared they had already crossed too far into the unknown to turn back. Chapter 2. The Awakening. The lights flickered again, and this time they didn't return to their usual steady glow. Instead, they sputtered in an erratic dance of dim flashes. The ship, once a familiar hum of mechanical life, now felt alive in a way that unsettled Elara. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to stretch, to move, as if the ship itself was breathing. Aldrin moved slowly toward the hatch. His face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy, staring ahead as if in a trance. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She reached out for him again, this time grabbing his shoulder with both hands, her grip tightening as she spun him around to face her. "Aldrin," she called, her voice sharp and urgent. "What's happening to you? Talk to me." For a long moment there was no response. His mouth opened, but the words that came out were not his own. They were distorted, warped, like the voice of the ship itself. The silence calls. It is the only truth. Elara recoiled, stumbling backward. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck standing up, as if the very air around her was charged with something malevolent. She wanted to shake him, to snap him out of whatever strange trance he was in, but before she could act, a low growl of static filled the air, drowning out her thoughts. The signal. It was louder now, more insistent. It pulsed like a heartbeat, pulsing. Through her veins, Elara steadied herself and spoke into her comm. "Miko, Captain, get to the aft hall now." The response from Miko was almost immediate. His voice came through crackling, distorted by the signal. "Elara, we're picking up a strange reading on the sensors. The entire ship seems unstable. It's like it's—" The line cut off abruptly. "Captain Rowe," Elara muttered, almost to herself. She glanced back at Aldrin, who now stood completely still, his eyes fixed on the hatch. Her heart pounded. She had to get him back to the control room. She had to stop whatever was happening to him before it spread to the rest of the crew. As she grabbed Aldrin's arm and tried to pull him away, his body jerked violently, resisting her. His hand shot out, grasping the edge of the hatch. His fingers were cold, impossibly cold, and his skin too pale. He began whispering again, his voice hoarse and distant, like it was being dragged from somewhere deep within the ship. "You can't stop it. The silence. The truth. We've already lost." Suddenly, the hatch doors creaked open with a sound that echoed through the corridor, filling the silence with an unsettling groan. There was no stopping it now. Whatever had taken hold of Aldrin, whatever force was controlling him, was pulling him deeper into the ship's bowels. Without thinking, Elara gripped Aldrin tighter, pulling him back. She could hear her breath quickening, her pulse hammering in her chest. She had no idea what was waiting for them in the lower levels, no idea what this signal had unleashed, but she knew deep down that it was far worse than anything they could have prepared for. With a surge of adrenaline, Elara yanked Aldrin away from the hatch and back into the corridor. For a moment, he was completely limp in her grasp, as if he had given in to her force. But then, his body went rigid again. His eyes snapped open, his pupils dilated to near black, and his lips curled into a twisted smile that didn't belong to him. "It's already inside, Elara," he said, his voice distorted beyond recognition. "You can't escape what's coming." "None of us can." Elara's breath hitched. She had to get him to the bridge. They needed answers. They needed to get out of there. But as she started to move, the ship suddenly shook. A low, resonating hum rattled the walls, followed by an eerie, grinding sound, as though the very structure of the Nightingale was being twisted and warped. The lights flickered again, this time with a sickly red hue. Elara turned back toward the control room. Her mind raced. If the ship was beginning to change, if it was becoming something else entirely, they were running out of time. The control room was eerily silent when Elara arrived, dragging Aldrin behind her. Captain Rowe and Miko were already there, their faces etched with concern. Miko was hunched over the sensor console, tapping frantically at the controls, his fingers moving at a speed that made Elara's stomach twist with unease. "Captain, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, urgency in her voice. "Aldrin, he's not himself. He's—" Before she could finish, Rowe cut her off. "It's happening to all of us," he said grimly, his voice hollow. "The ship, it's changing. It's not just the signal anymore. The entire system is being overridden. It's like we're being rewritten." "Rewritten?" Elara repeated, the words sinking like a stone in her gut. "Yes," Rowe answered, his eyes scanning the readouts on the control panel. "The signal's not just a call. It's a manipulation. It's infiltrating our systems, our minds. We're becoming part of it." Miko looked up from the console, his face pale. "I don't know how much longer we have before the ship goes completely offline. If the signal is controlling the Nightingale, if it's overriding the ship's systems, we might lose everything. Communication, navigation, even life support." Elara took a step forward. "So what do we do?" Rowe's eyes met hers, filled with a haunted knowing. "We find the source, we stop it. Before it consumes us all." The ship trembled again, a violent shudder running through the walls. A low, guttural hum filled the air, growing louder with every passing second. The signal had become more than just a sound. It was now part of the very fabric of the Nightingale. Elara swallowed hard, her heart racing. They were too far in now, too close. There was no turning back. She turned toward the door. "Let's move." But as she stepped forward, a voice echoed through the corridor, low, resonant, and unmistakable. "We are waiting." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the very walls of the ship, the metal floors beneath her feet. It was a voice she had heard before, but she hadn't recognized it until now. It was the ship, the Nightingale itself, speaking. And as the last word echoed in her mind, Elara felt it, a pulse deep within her, a hum that vibrated through her bones. It was the ship. No, it was the force behind the signal. It was calling to her, pulling her in. The truth was closer now, waiting to be uncovered. But would she survive the journey? Or would she become part of the silence? The clock was ticking, and Elara had no idea how much time they had left. Chapter 3. Into the Depths. The silence after the voice echoed through the ship was suffocating. The hum that had filled the air moments before seemed to pulse now, deep and resonant like a heartbeat. It was everywhere, inside the walls, inside. Elara's head, inside her chest. She could feel it pulsing through her veins. "We need to move," Captain Rowe said, his voice a low growl, breaking the oppressive silence. His eyes were fixed ahead, his expression tight with determination. Elara nodded, feeling the weight of his words press down on her. It was clear now that the ship, the Nightingale, wasn't just a passive observer in this. It was part of the mystery. Whatever force controlled the signal, whatever ancient intelligence was behind it, had begun to invade the very fabric of the ship, and now they were all at its mercy. The crew had gathered in the control room, and for the first time Elara saw the fear in their eyes. The signs were clear. This wasn't just a strange transmission. They were being pulled into something far worse. "What are we dealing with, Captain?" Miko asked, his voice shaking slightly as he hovered over the sensor array, frantically adjusting the controls. "I've never seen anything like this before. It's not just hacking the ship's systems, it's rewriting them." Rowe's gaze didn't waver. "The ship is alive. It's becoming more than just a vessel. It's a conduit. The signal isn't just data. It's a living thing, and it wants us to understand it, to merge with it." A wave of unease rippled through the crew. Elara felt it too, like the floor beneath her feet was shifting, like the ship itself was subtly changing, becoming something alien. "We need to find the source," Elara said, trying to push aside the growing dread in her chest. "We need to stop this before it gets worse." Rowe nodded. "Agreed. The signal is coming from the lower levels of the ship. We'll head down to the engine room. It's the heart of the Nightingale, and if we're going to have any chance of shutting it down, that's where we start." The decision was made quickly, but there was no confidence in the air. Only a shared understanding that the danger was growing, and they were running out of time. Each passing second felt like it was pushing them deeper into an inescapable nightmare. The corridor outside the control room was dark. The usual soft lighting had dimmed to an eerie glow, casting long shadows along the walls. Every step they took echoed too loudly, as though the ship was listening, anticipating their movements. The air was thick with the metallic scent of fear, and Elara's breath caught as she passed the walls. They felt too close, too alive. A sudden chill swept through the hallway, and Elara pulled her jacket tighter around her, though the cold didn't seem natural. It was as if the very essence of the ship had shifted. A low hum filled the air, resonating from the walls, the floors, the ceiling. It vibrated through her body, a discomforting sensation she couldn't shake. "This way," Captain Rowe ordered, his voice steady but strained. "We're close." They reached the elevator shaft that led to the lower levels. The doors slid open with an unnatural ease, and they stepped inside. Miko quickly tapped in the command, but the usual soft ping of the elevator's movement was absent. Instead, there was a low, reverberating groan, like the very bones of the Nightingale were creaking under some unseen weight. As they descended, the ship seemed to grow quieter. Not in the usual way of an empty ship, but in a way that felt as though the space around them was holding its breath. Waiting, Elara's skin prickled and her grip tightened around the railing. She could feel the pull of the signal again, now more insistent than ever. It was close. So close. The doors slid, open to the engine room, but what they saw when they entered made Elara's stomach drop. The normally sterile high-tech room was now in chaos. The engine core, usually a complex array of lights, panels, and wires, was alive, swirling with a sickly purple glow that had never been there before. The walls around the core were moving, shifting like the ship's insides were breathing. The pulsing signal was coming from here, and it felt more like a presence now. An entity. Elara could feel it pressing against her, urging her to approach. "Gods," Miko whispered, his voice barely audible over the low, guttural hum that filled the room. "What is that?" Ro took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the center of the engine core. It seemed to be growing, warping, as though it was trying to take shape. The very air in the room shimmered, vibrating in a way that made Elara's teeth ache. Then, as if answering some unspoken question, the ship's main comm system crackled to life. A voice, low and ancient, came through, so clear that it felt like it was coming from inside her skull. "You've come. You've always come." The words sent a shockwave of dread through Elara's chest. She turned to Ro, her breath coming in. Shallow gasps. "It's talking to us, it—" The voice interrupted, almost as if it could read her thoughts. "You are nothing but a reflection, a brief spark in the darkness, but now you will know. You will understand." The glow around the engine core intensified, bathing the room in a violent flash of purple. Elara stepped back, heart racing. She could see the way the light bent and warped the space around them, as if the walls themselves were reshaping. "We have to shut it down," Miko yelled, but there was no certainty in his voice. "If we don't—" Before he could finish, the entire room shook violently, as though the Nightingale was being torn apart. A loud, shrieking sound reverberated through the walls, and the lights flickered. In the distance, a door to the aft of the engine room slammed open. Elara's gaze snapped to it, and for a brief moment she thought she saw something move, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Shadows that weren't shadows, shapes that flickered and warped. And then, just as quickly, they were gone. The voice continued, its tone now rising in intensity, filling every inch of the room. "Come closer. Know the truth. It is already within you. It has always been." The temperature in the room plummeted, and Elara shivered, stepping closer to Ro. He was staring at the core, but she could see the same fear in his eyes that she felt. The core, the ship, it was no longer a vessel. It had become something far darker, something that wanted them to understand. "Get away from it," Elara shouted, but her words felt weak against the overwhelming force that now filled the room. Before they could react, the engine core pulsed again, stronger than before, and the ground beneath them buckled. The ship groaned in agony, and the lights above them flickered once more, this time not to return, and then the darkness swallowed them whole. Chapter 4. The Heart of Silence. The silence that followed the collapse of the engine room was unlike any Elara had ever experienced. It wasn't the natural silence of deep space, where the hum of machinery and distant radio signals were the only things that filled the void. No, this was a dead silence, complete and suffocating, as if the ship itself had gone still, holding its breath in anticipation. Elara stood motionless, her heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't see, couldn't hear anything beyond the pounding in her ears. Her hands were trembling, though she didn't remember them shaking before. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but the air felt thick, like she was inhaling something, far more sinister than oxygen. And then, with a crackle of static, the lights returned, but they weren't the same. The purple glow that had filled the room before now lingered in the corners, pooling like ink in the edges of her vision. The shadows in the room no longer felt like mere absence. They seemed to breathe with a purpose, and the low hum that had once been distant now thrummed through the very walls, vibrating in the marrow of her bones. Elara glanced around the room, her eyes wild, seeking any sign of her crew. Ro was still there, standing beside her. Though his face was pale and drawn, the resolve that had once been in his eyes now replaced with a gnawing uncertainty. Miko was closer to the central console, his hands hovering over the panels, as if unsure whether to touch them, to make the wrong move. "We need to find a way out of here," Elara said, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper. Her words seemed to hang in the air before they were swallowed by the oppressive silence. "If we don't, we're going to lose more than just the ship." Ro nodded, but he didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on the heart of the engine room, where the glowing core pulsed like a beating heart. It was no longer just an anomaly. It was something else, alive, sentient, and it was calling to them. A soft groan echoed through the ship, but this time, it wasn't just the walls. It was deeper, coming from within, from beneath their feet. The ship was alive. It was no longer just a vessel. They were inside it, tangled in the veins of something far more ancient. Miko turned, his face a mask of fear. "It's not just controlling the systems," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum. "It's rewriting everything. The ship's not just reacting anymore. It's actively changing itself, its structure, its purpose. It's becoming something else." Elara's stomach churned. They were no longer just trying to survive an alien signal. The Nightingale was evolving, twisting, becoming one with whatever intelligence had sent the signal. The idea of escaping now seemed laughable. The ship itself would not let them go. "We can't let it keep evolving," Ro said, finally speaking, his voice grim. "Whatever this thing is, whatever it wants, it's already too far. We have to stop it here before it takes us all." But the question was, how? The air seemed to grow heavier as they moved further into the heart of the engine room. The walls now seemed to pulse, faint veins of purple energy running through them, flickering and shifting as if reacting to their presence. The room itself felt wrong, the geometry of it seeming to stretch and distort in ways that defied logic. Elara's mind raced. The voice, the one that had echoed through their comms earlier, was still there, whispering, resonating in her mind. It was always there, just beneath the surface. "You are nothing but a reflection," it said. "You are fleeting. I have always been here." She shook her head, trying to push the voice away, but it only seemed to grow louder, more insistent. "We are waiting." The message was clear now. It wasn't just a signal, it was a command, an invitation, a warning. The ship, the core, the entity, it was beckoning them forward, pulling them closer to the truth. But what truth? What did it want them to understand? "We have to find the source," Miko said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. His eyes were frantic. "If we can sever the connection, if we can shut down the core, it might stop this." Ro stepped forward, his expression hardening with resolve. "Then we move quickly. We don't have much time before this ship becomes something we can't fight." They made their way toward the center of the room, where the core thrummed in anticipation. The closer they got, the stronger the pull became. It was as though the ship itself was reaching out for them, drawing them toward the source of the signal, the heart of the Nightingale. Elara could feel it now, deep within her. The signal, the entity. It was in her thoughts, in her dreams. It was everywhere. It wanted them. No, it wanted her. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones, pushing against her mind, whispering words that seemed to belong to her, to everything she had ever known. "Come closer." Her hands clenched at her sides, and she fought the urge to turn, to approach the heart of the core. It was calling to her, and it was the same call that had once brought them to this ship, to this moment. She gritted her teeth, focusing on the task at hand. They couldn't let it win. But just as they reached the edge of the core's chamber, the floor shook again, this time with a violent force that knocked them all off their feet. The walls of the engine room groaned, their surfaces bending in unnatural ways, the metal warping and twisting like the body of some great beast. A high-pitched whine pierced the air, like the scream of the ship's very soul. The core flickered, its purple glow flashing brighter and faster, faster until it became a blinding light. Elara shielded her eyes as the room began to distort around them, the shapes of the walls becoming more fluid, more alien. "We need to go," Miko shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "This is it. It's too much." But as he turned to run, something inside the core shifted. A dark shape, a figure, no, a presence emerged from the center, its form too vast and incomprehensible to understand. It was massive, dark, and pulsing with the same energy as the core. It was the source, and as it moved, the very air seemed to bend with it. The walls of the ship twisted as though they were made of clay, reforming around them. A deep, reverberating voice filled the room once more. "You cannot escape. You are already part of us. We are the silence. We are the truth." The figure began to stretch toward them, an ever-growing mass of darkness and light, and Elara felt it. Something within her, something deep inside, was beginning to break. She could hear the signal now, louder than ever, not just in the ship, but in her mind, in her body. The entity had already begun to take them, and they had no way of stopping it. Chapter 5. The Embrace of Darkness. The figure looming before them was not just an entity. It was an idea. It wasn't a being that could be touched or reasoned with, nor was it something that could be understood in any conventional way. It was the silence between the stars. It was the void between thoughts. It was a force cold and insatiable, stretching out toward them with a hunger that was as ancient as the cosmos itself. Elara stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. She could feel it now, the pull of the signal not just in her ears but in her bones, in her very cells. It was a part of her, as if the signal had woven itself into the very fabric of her being. "We are waiting," the voice said again, its tone reverberating through the walls, through her very core. The figure shifted, its form distorting with the pulse of the core, black tendrils of darkness unfurling, stretching outward like the fingers of a godless hand reaching for them. Elara's heart raced. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, pressing against her chest with a suffocating weight. Ro stepped in front of her, his hand gripping the handle of his blaster. He fired, the weapon's shot slicing through the air in a bright, sharp arc. But it had no effect. The energy simply bent around the figure, as if it were nothing more than light bending around a shadow. The figure didn't even flinch. "Get back!" Ro shouted, his voice thick with panic. "Get away from it!" Miko was already backing away, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with fear. "This is it, isn't it? It's already over." "No," Elara said, her voice breaking through the fog of terror that had clouded her mind. "It's not over, not yet." They had come this far. She wouldn't let this ship, this entity, take them without a fight. They needed to find a way to shut it down, to sever the connection before it swallowed them whole. But how? The presence loomed larger, filling the space in front of them with an oppressive darkness. It didn't move in the way a physical being would. It was everywhere and nowhere, all at once. Its tendrils reached out, snaking through the air like living smoke, and Elara could feel the pressure on her mind intensify, like the very thoughts she held were being pulled from her, consumed. "Come to us," the voice beckoned, softer this time. "Embrace the truth. Become one with the silence." The words echoed in her skull, reverberating with a rhythmic pulse. They were growing stronger, and Elara knew, deep down she knew, that if they stayed any longer they would lose themselves to it. She looked at Ro, whose face was still set in determination, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "Captain," she said, trying to steady her voice, "we have to stop this now. The signal, the core, it's controlling everything. It's rewriting the ship, changing its very nature. We need to find the source and cut it off." Ro's gaze hardened. "I'm not leaving here without you, Elara." Elara nodded, her heart racing as she turned toward Miko. "Miko, what are the odds of us accessing the central data core? Can we get into the command center and pull the logs? There has to be something we can use." Miko's eyes were wide with panic, but he wiped the sweat from his forehead and nodded, though doubt lingered in his expression. "I don't know if we can. If the signal has integrated with the ship's systems, accessing any of it might be impossible. But it's worth a shot. Without another word, they moved. Elara didn't wait to see the entity's next move. She couldn't afford to. Every second they spent in this room, in the presence of the signal, brought them closer to being consumed. Walls seemed to shift around them as they ran, bending and warping, like the ship itself was watching them, understanding their every move. The floor beneath their feet pulsed with each step, sending ripples through the air as if the ship was alive, reacting to their every motion. As they reached the control panel, Elara threw herself against the console, her hands trembling as she activated the emergency override. The screen flickered, the usual display glitching before the interface appeared, but the commands she inputted had no effect. The ship's systems were locked down, controlled entirely by the core. "It's no use," Miko said softly, his voice filled with despair. "The signal has taken control of everything. We can't override it." Suddenly, a loud, dissonant hum filled the room, something different from the usual signal. It was a high-pitched, jarring noise that scraped at Elara's nerves. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound seemed to penetrate every fiber of her being. The walls shook violently, as though the entire ship was convulsing in response. And then, something new happened. A ripple, a shift in the very air around them, and a shape, no, a figure materialized from the shadows near the core. It was humanoid in form, but something was off. Its body seemed to flicker, a strange distortion between light and dark. It moved without sound, its limbs stretching and contorting in unnatural ways. It wasn't a person, it wasn't human. It was a reflection, a remnant. The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing with the same purple hue as the core. As it approached, the humming grew louder, vibrating through Elara's body. Her mind screamed in protest, but she couldn't move. The pull of the entity was overwhelming. "Get away from it!" Rose shouted, raising his weapon, but the figure did not react. It simply stood there watching them, its eyes filled with something unfathomable. "Why are you doing this?" Elara demanded, her voice raw with frustration. "What do you want from us?" The figure tilted its head, its form flickering like an image on a broken screen. "We are the Silence," it replied, its voice layered with 1,000 different tones. "We are the truth that lies between the stars. You cannot resist. You are already part of us." The words pierced Elara's thoughts, and for a moment the room seemed to collapse around her. The walls, the ship, the very fabric of reality seemed to fold in on itself. Then, a sudden burst of static erupted from the comms. A crackling voice cut through the chaos. "Elara, this is the bridge. Do you read? Elara, please respond." It was Captain Rowe's voice, but no, it wasn't Rowe. Not completely. And then Elara understood. The signal wasn't just controlling the ship, it was rewriting them too. Chapter 6. The shattered reflection. Elara's head spun as the distorted voice continued to pulse through her mind. The figure before them, the strange humanoid shape, its features flickering between light and darkness, took a step closer, its presence pressing in on her like a vice, suffocating the air around her. It was no longer just a being. It was an embodiment of the ship, of the signal itself. "We are the Silence. We are the truth," it whispered again, the words now heavy and thick, like they were being fed into her very soul. Her vision blurred. She tried to move, to speak, but her body felt heavy, as if the ship's gravitational field was warping around them. The voice from the comms, a distorted version of Rose, crackled again. But this time, Elara couldn't even tell if it was real or just another layer of the ship's manipulation. "Elara, please, you must understand. We are... you..." Her pulse raced, her chest tightening with the creeping realization. Whatever this entity was, it wasn't simply a parasite on the ship. It was something far worse. It was trying to merge with them, to take control of their very essence. She forced her eyes open, focusing on the figure that now stood mere feet from her. It wasn't a reflection of her fear, as she had initially thought. It was a manifestation of everything the entity was, an echo of its power warped and fragmented by her mind. The darkness in the creature's eyes shimmered with an understanding that Elara didn't want to confront, but couldn't look away from. "You are already a part of me," the voice repeated. "You are nothing but the next step in my existence. Together, we will be infinite." Her vision flared, and the walls of the room seemed to melt away. She felt the ground beneath her feet tremble, as if the ship itself was growing aware of their struggle. The low hum of the core throbbed through her, a rhythmic beat that threatened to drown out all rational thought. Ro moved beside her, his hand gripping his blaster tightly. He was sweating, his breath coming in short bursts. Miko, on the other hand, was frozen, his eyes wide with terror, staring at the figure in stunned disbelief. He was paralyzed, caught between the voice of the entity and the need to escape. But escape wasn't an option anymore. The very air in the room seemed to be turning against them, thickening, pressing down as if the Nightingale had become one with the entity. "We can't let it take us," Elara said, her voice hoarse and desperate. "We need to fight it. We need to sever the connection." "How?" Rose spat, his frustration evident as his weapon wavered in his hands. "Every system is controlled by it. It's everywhere. The core, the ship, it's all one. We can't fight something that is the ship." Elara's thoughts raced. It wasn't just the ship, it was them too. The signal wasn't only taking control of the Nightingale, it was merging with their minds, their thoughts, making them a part of its vast network. The more they resisted, the more it would feed off them, consume them entirely. Suddenly, an idea struck her. It wasn't a solution. It was a gamble, a desperate act, but it was the only chance they had left. "Miko," she said, her voice sharp and urgent. "The override console. The one in the command center, you remember it?" Miko blinked, his gaze still. Distant, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Yeah, but the signal, it's controlling everything. If we go back to the command center, it will just—" "I know," Elara interrupted, her mind sharp despite the growing haze around her. "But we need to stop it from controlling us before it takes us fully. The command center has one last fail-safe. If we can access it manually, we might be able to shut down the core. Maybe we can disrupt the signal long enough to sever the connection." "That's insane," Ro growled. "It'll tear us apart the second we try." "Maybe," Elara said, her eyes narrowing. "But we don't have a choice anymore. We either stop it now or we become part of it." The figure, still watching them with its glowing eyes, made a sound, an almost inaudible hum that seemed to echo inside her skull. "It is too late," the voice whispered again. "You cannot outrun your nature. We are already here. You are already ours." Her breath caught as the presence seemed to intensify, the air thickening, but she steeled herself, pushing the fear down. They couldn't give in. Not now. Ro looked at her, his expression unreadable, before lowering his blaster with a sharp nod. "Let's move. We don't have much time." The hallway outside the engine room was a blur. Elara could feel the walls of the Nightingale closing in on her, the shifting walls warping as if they were aware of their every movement. The lights flickered, their purple hue casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe along the corridor. They moved, quickly, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Each step felt like it carried them deeper into the ship's grip, the hum of the core pounding in the back of their minds like a second heartbeat. Miko's eyes darted nervously to every shadow, his hands trembling at his sides, but he kept moving. Ro, leading the charge, remained stoic, but Elara could see the strain on his face. They were all fighting against something they couldn't possibly comprehend, and every second they spent in the ship was a second closer to being absorbed into its dark embrace. The command center loomed ahead, the heavy metal doors just beyond. The next hallway. The signal pressed against her thoughts, urging her to turn back, to stop. But she gritted her teeth and kept going, her legs moving with a strength she didn't know she had. The moment they reached the doors, Miko fumbled for The control panel, his fingers working quickly but unsteadily. The doors slid open with a loud hiss, and they stepped inside. The room was filled with the same unsettling purple light. The central command console flickered, its interface glitching, but Elara could still see the interface, the last failsafe, the emergency protocols embedded deep within the ship's system. But the core's presence, the entity, was already here, filling the room with its weight. Its dark tendrils snaked around the console, creeping toward them, and the voice pulsed through the air like a mantra. It is futile. You will never escape. You will never be free. Elara swallowed her fear, moving toward the console. She didn't have time to think, to hesitate. They had only one shot. Hold them off, she said to Ro. Miko, you have to unlock the failsafe now. Miko nodded, though the fear in his eyes was evident. He turned to the console and began typing furiously. The voice from the core grew louder, a chorus of whispers that scraped against Elara's sanity. You cannot fight your nature. But she didn't listen. She couldn't afford to. The failsafe sequence began. The room flickered violently. The ship seemed to tremble, and for a moment, Elara thought the walls might collapse around them. The air grew even heavier, pressing down on her chest as the light from the core flashed brighter, almost blinding. Miko's fingers flew across the console, and with a final desperate push, the last command was entered. And then, silence. Chapter 7, The Awakening. The silence that followed the final command was deafening. For a heartbeat, Elara could hardly breathe, her lungs frozen in anticipation. The intense pressure in the room, the pull of the entity, everything that had felt so heavy moments before, dissipated in an instant. It was as if the entire ship held its breath. The console in front of Miko flickered once more, the purple light that had been filling the room now fading. Elara blinked, trying to adjust to the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The pulse from the core, the rhythmic hum that had dominated their every movement, was now gone, replaced by a tense stillness. The ship seemed still. But then, without warning, the walls of the command center began to groan, a deep, ominous sound that rattled her bones. The temperature in the room dropped rapidly, and a chill swept over them, settling in the pit of her stomach. "We've done it," Miko said, his voice shaky but relieved, his hands still resting on the console. But there was no joy in his words, only a quiet disbelief. "We stopped it, the failsafe worked." Elara didn't share his relief. She could feel it, feel the shift in the air. It wasn't over. Not yet. "We don't know what we've really done," she said quietly. "The core is still alive, and whatever that entity was, it's still here. We've only delayed the inevitable." Before Miko could respond, the lights flickered again, and then another shake, this one stronger than before. The ship seemed to tremble in response to an unseen force, the sound of shifting metal and groaning bulkheads echoing down the long corridors beyond. Ro's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but he didn't fire. They didn't need another futile attempt at stopping whatever this was. They needed answers. "Are we too late?" Miko asked, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Elara's gaze moved to the central core's location, visible through the glass panels at the far end of the command center. The light from the core was still visible, dim but pulsing rhythmically, like the beat of a heart. The energy felt different, though. Not as overpowering as before, but still undeniably present, still calling to them. "Not yet," Elara replied, her voice firm despite the doubts clawing at her mind. "We need to make sure that shutdown sequence is fully integrated into the system. There's no way of knowing what the core has done to the ship's systems in the meantime. It could still be rewriting its own code." Ro nodded, stepping away from the wall he'd been leaning against, his eyes hardening with determination. "We need to get to the heart of it, wherever that is. We've already gone this far, we can't back down now." They all turned to leave, but before they could make it to the door, a high-pitched whine began to fill the air again. This time sharper, more insistent. The lights dimmed, flickering in and out like a dying star. The walls shuddered again, but this time the ship didn't just tremble. It ripped. A jagged tear appeared in the center of the room, as if the fabric of reality itself was being undone. Elara stumbled back, her hand flying out to catch herself against the nearest console. A jagged line of light split the air. The room, once familiar, now seemed to twist and warp in impossible ways. The tear was widening, and then from the tear emerged something else, a shadow, dark and vast, coiling through the room like smoke. It didn't move like a creature, but like a living thing made of pure thought and malice. It slithered toward them, its presence growing stronger, more oppressive. "No," Elara whispered, her heart pounding. "This isn't over. It never left." A voice filled her mind, sharp, painful, scraping against her thoughts like claws on metal. "You are the last." The shadow swelled, and Elara realized what she was looking at was not a figure but the true form of the entity. Not a manifestation, but the essence, the core of it. What had been speaking to them was merely a piece of the whole, a fragment of something far more powerful, far older, and now that entity was breaking free. Her mind reeled as the darkness approached, as if the very air was suffocating under its weight. Ro raised his weapon again, but Elara knew it was futile. Nothing had worked against it before, and she doubted anything would work now. "We're too late," Miko said, his voice breaking. He stepped back, his hands outstretched as if to keep the dark tendrils at bay. But it was no use. They were trapped. The shadow reached forward, its tendrils sliding across the walls, warping the reality. Around them, every touch left a rippling effect, distorting the ship's form, pulling it into itself. "You will join us," it whispered, its voice 1,000 echoes, one voice. "We are the endless." The air around them seemed to collapse, and Elara felt herself, pulled into the core's pull once more, the void in her mind expanding. But she couldn't give up. "Not yet!" "Ro!" she shouted, her voice desperate. "The core, there has to be one final sequence to completely sever the signal. You have to destroy it now." Ro didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, his face set in grim determination. "Cover me," he barked to Miko. "Get ready to override any security lockouts." Elara turned toward the command console again, her mind racing. "Miko, start the sequence again. We can't let it re-establish its connection." The darkness seemed to breathe around them, growing in intensity and size, but Miko moved without question. His fingers flew across the console, typing in the override codes with frantic precision. The ship groaned again, the walls shaking, the power flickering in and out as the entity continued to writhe, undeterred. Then, nothing. The console went dark. The tearing shadow faltered, its tendrils writhing in confusion. The room went still, as if the entire ship had ceased to exist. For a moment, there was only silence. Elara's breath came in short gasps. Her heart pounded in her chest. Had they done it? But then, without warning, a burst of light erupted from the core, blinding and violent. The room shook violently, knocking them off their feet. A scream erupted in Elara's throat as the last remnants of the entity reached out, attempting to swallow them whole. And then, nothing. The ship was silent. The core was still. And all that remained was the terrifying question. Had they truly escaped? Or was this merely the beginning of something far worse? Chapter 8. The Quiet Aftermath. The silence that followed the explosion of light was all-consuming, stretching across the ship like a heavy blanket. Elara blinked rapidly, her senses dulled and her body sore from the violent tremors that had just rocked the command center. Her mind swirled with disorienting fragments of images, flashes of the shadow, of the core pulsing with otherworldly energy, of the cold, suffocating force that had nearly consumed them all. She lay on the cold floor, chest heaving, trying to shake off the lingering dizziness. Her head throbbed, her ears still ringing from the blinding light that had overwhelmed her. The air in the room was thick, filled with the acrid scent of ozone and something else, something metallic like burnt wiring. Slowly, she pushed herself up, her body protesting the movement. Her gaze flickered to the console, where Miko was, already on his feet, his face ashen, eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he wasn't moving. Did we do it? Miko whispered, his voice barely audible over the steady hum of the dying systems. Elara could only nod weakly, though uncertainty gnawed at her insides. The room was eerily still. The ship's systems, once saturated with that maddening pulse, were now muted. The core had stopped its thrumming. The power was out. It felt like a lifeless shell, but even as she breathed a small sigh of relief, a part of her remained wary. The absence of the entity's presence was too absolute, too final. It was as though the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next step. Ro, who had also dropped to the ground when the shockwave hit, pushed himself to his feet. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the room, the walls, the ceiling, as though expecting the ship to collapse in on them. Slowly, he turned toward Elara. "We don't know if it's over," he said quietly, the weight of his words sinking into her chest. Whatever that thing was, it could still be alive, just dormant for now. Elara nodded, rubbing her temples. Her mind was still foggy, as though the very act of fighting back against the entity had drained her of something vital. But the core is quiet, she muttered. "We stopped its signal, or at least as we shut it down temporarily. That's something. We can make repairs. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft hiss, followed by a groan that echoed through the corridors. The ship itself seemed to be alive. The Nightingale was groaning, its bulkheads shifting slightly, as though the ship was realigning itself in response to the damage done. "Not quite dead yet, huh?" Ro muttered, looking over at Miko. "We can't just sit here and wait. We need to confirm everything." Miko nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. His eyes darted nervously around the room, but then he squared his shoulders, a semblance of focus returning. "I'll check the power grids," he said, his voice still shaky. "If the core is dormant, we should be able to stabilize the systems manually. We'll need to reboot everything from the central control. He paused, eyes narrowing. "Ro, go check the bridge. Elara, you stay here with me." Elara hesitated, feeling a surge of unease in her chest. It felt wrong to separate, but Miko was right. If the core was only dormant, they needed to confirm it and lock it down. They needed to act quickly. "Be careful," she said softly, though her voice lacked the strength it once had. Ro gave a short nod, then turned and made for the door. He didn't look back, his jaw clenched in silent resolve. As the door slid shut behind him, Elara turned toward Miko, who had already begun typing rapidly on the console. The flickering light seemed to dim further as the ship's systems continued to struggle, but the oppressive hum that had filled the air was gone. That was something they hadn't had for what felt like days. Miko glanced up briefly, his eyes wide and filled with a tension that hadn't quite left him. "We need to make sure the fail-safes are in place," he muttered, eyes scanning the systems. "If there's even a chance it could come back." Elara nodded, stepping over to his side. "I'll help. Let me access the diagnostics." The next few minutes felt like hours. They ran every test, every scan. They checked every system from the engines to the core itself. They confirmed that the signal was no longer active, that the core's energy levels were stable, but there was no denying the feeling that something was off. The room felt wrong. Not empty, but waiting, as though the ship itself had been marked by something ancient and unknown, its systems forever altered. As Miko worked, Elara's mind drifted. She couldn't shake the vision of the shadow, the figure that had tried to consume them, the one that had spoken in 1,000 voices. She shuddered at the thought. "Do you think it's gone?" she asked, her voice tight, not really knowing who she was asking. Miko, herself, the ship? Miko didn't answer immediately, his fingers still moving quickly over the control panel. After a long pause, he sighed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think we've disrupted it. But the core, it's not just a power source. It's something else. Something more." I don't think we'll ever fully understand what we've been dealing with. Elara nodded, her gaze drifting to the distant shadows of the command center. The darkness beyond the console seemed to shift, as if watching her. Do you think... She hesitated, swallowing hard. Do you think it was ever really part of the ship? Or was it something else entirely? Something that used the ship? Miko paused in his work, a frown crossing his face. He didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was quiet as though afraid of the answer. I don't think it was ever part of the ship, he said softly. I think the ship was just a conduit. Use the Nightingale to find us, to find whatever it needed. Elara's stomach churned at the thought. They had unknowingly walked into a trap, a place where they'd been targeted, where the signal had been waiting for the right moment to strike. The Nightingale hadn't been a random ship. It had been a vessel for something much darker. But the worst part was the unanswered question that hung in the air between them. What had they truly unleashed when they stopped the core? Was it truly gone, or had they only sealed away something far worse than they could possibly imagine? The answer lingered, cold and unspoken. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.